Hello everybody, this is Prue and this is a video about the full moon in Sagittarius, which is happening on Wednesday, late morning, 11:14 on the 26th of May. Now I just have to do a little caveat before I start talking about the full moon, and every hour of the day is connected to a planet that rules it. And whenever I do videos when we're in the planet in the hour belonging to Saturn, I always end up having to do like several retakes of it. And Saturn is a planet that's very much connected to, on some levels, restriction, limitation, where we don't always feel at our best. It's where we have to kind of really perhaps overcome self-doubt to become our own authority. And Saturn sits at my house of career. So I notice that whenever it's the hour of Saturn, I think, oh, that video took longer than the others. If I'm doing it in the hour of Mercury, it's all about communication, it just flows really quickly. So one would argue, well, why don't you just do all your videos in the hour of Mercury? And I wish I was that organized. So I have this little spot now in the day and I want to grab it. But when I check the time, yes, we are in the hour of Saturn. And the thing about astrology is that it's not there in many ways to rule our lives. It's there to help us navigate it, the twists and turns in many ways. It doesn't mean to say I shouldn't do a video. I feel like I'm really overthinking this. But it just means to say this could be where I might think, oh, that the words might not flow as well, but my message will still be the same. So I guess what I'm just trying to say is that astrology can be a really amazing guide for us, but we still have to go out there and live our lives, don't we? We still have to grab the opportunities with what we're being offered. And this is a time where I can make the most of this video. And so here I am, not in my perfection. So let's take a step back and think about this full moon. So whenever we have full moons, it's basically we have our new moon, which is the beginning of a new cycle. And then we have 2 weeks of the moon waxing, getting bigger, and then it peaks at the full moon. So that really means that on Wednesday, we're going to have the culmination of the last 2 weeks. So full moons tend to be a time of intensity. It tends to be a time when feelings come to a head, where we can feel more emotional, where we can feel more raw, more sensitive. It's also a great time for celebration. If we think about what our ancestors would have been doing, because remember, they would have lived a life before electricity. And I always think it's kind of strange to think, gosh, was it only like 100 years ago that we would have lived that kind of world? And since we do have electricity, which is great because we can just turn on that light and carry on living, we do lose our connection with that moon cycle. Perhaps, well, they say that the unnatural light very much impacts our pineal gland as well. And we have, so it does change our relationship with the moon. And I think the moon cycle is one of the easiest astrological cycles that we can connect with. So it's just about realizing that even though we might not live our life in harmony or kind of by being dictated, knowing what exactly where the moon is, we can really, Saturn hour. So what was my point that I'm trying to say? Even though, unlike our ancestors who would have been really influenced by their day-to-day activities, we are still impacted on an emotional level. We're still impacted our cellular level, because let's think, what does the moon do to the tides? You know, it controls so much of what's going on with the waters of the world, and we are 70% water. Each of our cell contains all that water, so we are being influenced whether we're aware of it or not. So our ancestors would have used the full moon light to meet up more, to celebrate, to connect, to feel more sociable. And I always think there is a really marked difference between a new moon, where we tend to be more introspective. There's no moon in the sky. Well, the moon actually doesn't have its own light. It's reflecting where the sun is. But when we look up at the sky, we won't see any moonlight. But on a full moon, we can see that amazing big ball of lunar light and energy. So we tend to feel a little bit more sociable. Feelings tend to come up and we tend to be more aware. It tends to illuminate areas in our life perhaps that we're not being aware of. And I always say nothing stays hidden under a full moon. So this full moon, as well as being a full moon, is also a supermoon. So a supermoon is when the moon is closest to Earth. It's called in perigee. And so what that means is we feel its influence more strongly. In fact, the moon that we have on Wednesday is the closest to Earth it's going to be all year. And as well as being a supermoon, it's also a lunar eclipse. So that gives it a lot more power. And if we think about what is the eclipse energy all about? Now, our ancestors, who remember would have lived a life very much influenced by the natural cycles, especially the moon, would have been really anxious about solar or lunar eclipses. because there was a sense of impending doom. It felt like the natural order had been interrupted in some way. Oh, I'm still going. So it would have felt like the natural order would have been interrupted in some way. So if we think about a solar eclipse, and I always think there was one, it's a very strong one we had in 1999. I remember at the time I was working in public relations and we all trotted out to the park and looked up at the sky, and then everyone was like, don't ever look at the solar eclipse. And I was like, oh my God, I have. What does this mean? Anyway, I'm still here and still seeing. But it was that real sense of foreboding. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, the sun turned, it was covered, it went completely dark. And I think it only lasted like 4 minutes, but there was that sense of like terror, of that vulnerability. And then it came back to life, and the moon came and everything did come back to life. And really without the sun, because remember this was a solar eclipse that happened in 1999, there is a sense that things do die, including us on many levels. So when we have a lunar eclipse, we look up and suddenly there is no moonlight. Suddenly it goes dark or red, and that's why it's called the blood moon. So that could be very terrifying, and there are lots of recorded incidences of what the ancestors would have done. So often the Native American Indians would have had this sense that the moon was being destroyed or being eaten in some way. They'd fire fiery arrows up to protect the moon in some ways, that there was a sense of vulnerability, that the moon was open to attack like humans were. And when the moon turned red, it was like the moon was bleeding like humans were. So there was that sense of a vulnerability of what happened to the moon. And even though, some, our ancestors, even when people were prepared and knew that the moon was coming, there was this great sense of fear that what it meant. And I think there's no doubt about it that an eclipse isn't saying that, we're doomed and terrible things are going to happen, but it is bringing in change. Eclipses are very much connected to something finishing in your life. There's something that's done its cycle. So one door will close so that another one will open. And the eclipse energy is very much connected to 6 months ahead. Like eclipse, we have something called eclipse seasons. They tend to happen in 2s or 3s. So in 6 months' time, we'll get the follow-on eclipse in many ways. So what's happening on Wednesday is going to have a very strong rippling effect. So it's really worth thinking, what is it that's being completed in my life? What am I letting go of? And if we think about this full moon is in Sagittarius, Sagittarius is the truth seeker of the zodiac. Now we all have Sagittarius in our chart. It's going to be connected to an area of your life. So Sagittarius is where we want to ask the big questions in life. It's where we want to be free. We want space to explore. We don't want to be held back in any way. So what you may be aware of, or what you may be experiencing, the sense of not wanting to be confined, needing to be free, wanting to ask those big questions. What is it that I'm interested in? What is my calling in life? What is my purpose? And things that aren't in alignment with who you are, where you're going anymore, will fall away. Now, sometimes this can feel really abrupt, and other times it can feel like a natural dissolving away. And just trust that whatever's going on is actually ensuring that there's space for something new to be created. Because it can feel intense. I definitely can feel this energy kind of brewing over this last few days, that the intensity is increasing as we go towards this big full moon, supermoon, lunar eclipse energy. So the best thing I always think about with the full moon, how can I make the most of it? Well, first of all, awareness can make a huge difference. And just almost taking a step back and going, what is it I'm feeling? Why am I feeling? What thoughts are coming up? And then creating ritual about it. Because yes, there are so many different rituals. You only have to Google full moon ritual and you could have more ideas, but it's actually what feels personal, what feels right for you. And often for me, it's really about getting out in nature, connecting to the heart and the source of nature in many ways, what's going on under that sky, and just taking a moment to think, what is being illuminated? What is it perhaps that I'm resisting? And what is it that I want to bring into my life more? Now, full moons are also incredibly cleansing. So a lot of people might put crystals outside, or they can collect full moon water, which is basically putting some water in a glass container and putting it outside and let it be filled with full moon energy. Just notice, what is it that you naturally feel that you want to do? Sometimes sleep can be interrupted, our brains can be racing, and it's just sometimes about surrendering to that. Just notice where your brain wants to take you, what thoughts are coming up in your mind, because nothing is coincidence around this time. It's really powerful. And I think sometimes when we're busy and life is moving really quickly, there is a sense that we don't always notice what's going on around us, and that's when the flags can get stronger. So is there anything else I want to say about this full moon in Sagittarius that's coming our way? I don't think there is. I think it's just our opportunity to stop, to have an awareness, and just to take a breath. What is it in our life that we need to let go of so that we can welcome in something new? Is it a behavior? Is it a dream? Is it a relationship? Is it a thought pattern? Because we're constantly evolving. I guess what's the expression? The only thing we can guarantee is change, or this too shall pass. So wherever you are, whatever going on in your life, trust there's a process, that this full moon, eclipse, supermoon is happening in an area of your life. And if you look at where Sagittarius falls, that will give you an idea of what the area of your life is, but also trust your instincts. You know, that's the wonderful thing about astrology. It's confirmation in many ways, but trust what's coming up for you and know that it's part of a greater picture, a greater healing, for you to embrace a new way. Sagittarius is incredibly idealistic. You know, it's represented by the archer. It's half horse, half human. It's one of the centaurs, the wise of the old classical world. So there's a lot of wisdom that we're able to tap into at this point. So just notice, what is it you want to do? What are your instincts telling you? And trust that. Wishing you a wonderful moon, sending you loads of love. Bye-bye.